I've been part of a campaign for a while that I was very excited to join. It's about a lord and 4 knights who go around sieging castles and dealing with some political situations. I was very excited to join. I rolled up a dwarf paladin and prepared for my first session. Here's where the first off indicator appeared on my radar. The DM is, I can't really say racist when it comes to D&D races, but he really holds firm to race stereotypes for D&D. Here are some examples. When making the character, I considered taking the noble background. I ended up taking the knight. And the DM told me that dwarves can't be nobles. Not too bad, but struck me as off. Second occurrence is when I entered a town with the party to get information on the quadrant. I flagged down an NPC and somehow managed to get into an argument with him. It led to him calling my dwarf character a hole digger. There have also been allusions to my dwarf always being able to find a mine, which he was a smith in his past, but why is it assumed he can practically sniff them out? When coming back from a missed session, my character was assumed to have just been drunk. You know, like dwarves do apparently. Even though I had planned for my character to be sober and trying hard to hold to a knightly code. I could adjust. We entered a tavern and the DM pulled up a song from YouTube that was an hour of dwarf music because they were dancing and apparently drunk. I had a fair bit of trouble talking to NPCs because they would talk down to my character. My smallest complaint is when a character called my dwarf short and I responded, "Keep that short people stuff to yourself." The DM broke character and replied to me saying, "Well, your character is short." Yeah, I know. He doesn't like being called short, which is why I said something. I may just be overreacting. It all comes to a slight head when I miss a session and come back. Turns out my fellow PCs have signed me up for a tournament. Okay, that's cool. Except I didn't know until 2 sessions later when we get into town that my character could die in it. A possible death I was unaware of until the king started ordering everyone who lost to be executed. I made it to the final round and face off against the king's knight, who has 3 attacks. I'm level 5, and this has been a 16 bracket tourney. I lose expectedly, and the DM rolls a d4 to see if I get executed. I don't, but the ordeal left a bad taste in my mouth. Along with the DM and other PCs just sending constant shots at me about dwarfs, I'm feeling like I should quit. I'm just tired of it. It's killing my enthusiasm. Alright, I've got a couple thoughts about this, but the first and maybe most important thing is you need to quit that game. Not because I agree with you that the DM is problematic, and it's not that I disagree either, but if you feel like you should quit, if you're tired of whatever's going on in the game, regardless of what it is, and if it's killing your enthusiasm for the game, you need to leave that game. I love D&D. I play every week, at least once a week, every week, and I have for years been with the same group for years, and I'm lucky that way. I understand how difficult it can be to find a decent tabletop RPG group, and I definitely understand the struggle of, if I quit this group, how long will it take to find another one, and so on. But at the end of the day, if there's something going on in a game that is damaging your passion for the hobby, then you need to leave. Now, on to my thoughts when it comes to the specifics of the original poster's story. So the OP titled their story as DM That's a Bit Problematic, and you can look at this from a couple different angles. You can look at what's going on and say, yes, the DM and the other PCs, in fact, are problematic. Or maybe you're the problem player at the table. Let me explain. Clearly, just going by what's in the OP's story, the OP is the odd one out. Clearly, the DM takes the D&D racial stereotypes seriously. Not seriously, but holds firm to them like the OP said. And obviously, the other players don't have a problem with it and, in fact, go along with it. That indicates that you, OP, are actually the odd one out of the group. Now, I'm not saying it's right, I'm not saying it's wrong, but it is what it is. And by the sounds of it, again, you sound like you're the odd one out, which I'm not saying that in a negative way. And I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you either. And for the record, you can say that the DM is racist when it comes to D&D races. You don't have to try to soften the blow by saying, I don't think I can say racist, but he holds firm to stereotypes for D&D. And mild racism in games like D&D are not necessarily an issue, because we're not talking about 2020 humans. We're talking about medieval-based fantasy races that in the novels and movies and games, it happens. Mild racism between races, it is there, and it is going to happen. And a lot of the time in most groups, things like that come up as jokes. And you may find that a lot of players and some DMs, especially the dungeon masters or game masters that are less experienced running the games, will hold firm to D&D racial stereotypes. It makes things a lot easier to organize in your mind if you say, okay, dwarves are like this, elves are like this, humans are like this, halflings are like this, just in general. It sounds like your DM is not a very experienced DM. Now, that might not be the case, but that's how it seems. And it sounds like the other players are just kind of having fun with it. Now, there are some things that show that the DM is clearly ignorant. For example, saying that dwarves can't be nobles. Why? I would have asked, well, why not? Is it a rule in your world that you're running, or is it just a misconception you have about the race of dwarves in a Dungeons & Dragons fantasy setting? And remember, there are different settings in Dungeons & Dragons. There's not, D&D itself is not just one overarching setting. There are many different settings in D&D, not to even start thinking about all the homebrew settings that people run. Point being, if a DM told me dwarves can't be nobles, I would ask, why not? There might actually be a legitimate reason. Perhaps in that world, that's just not the way dwarves typically are. And the key word there is typically, though, because, and this comes back to it sounding a lot like your DM is not very experienced either in the hobby or not very experienced running games, because there's a lot of things that happen in general, but there's always exceptions to the rules. Maybe 9 out of 10 dwarfs cannot be nobles because they just don't hold those ideals. But there's always that 1 out of 10 who does hold those ideals and, in fact, acts as a noble. Anyway, I see no reason and have never heard of anything like that where that specific race cannot be noble. So, again, it comes back to your DM being very inexperienced. And the next thing is that when you say that you went to town trying to talk to an NPC and you somehow managed to get into an argument with him, that's pretty vague. Without more context, it's hard to say what happened with that, but your, again, DM could just be inexperienced and still learning the ropes of how to run a game and how to RP NPCs. Or maybe the NPCs in the town that you're in are, in fact, a bit racist toward dwarfs. Or maybe it's something that you did. It's hard to say with something as vague as somehow managed to get into an argument. And then when it comes to allusions to your dwarf always being able to find a mine, that, again, you can look at in a couple of different ways. And frankly, yes, dwarves would generally be able to figure out where you might look for a mine or minerals or stuff like that. Again, it comes back to the fact is there are racial stereotypes in D&D, and dwarfs typically are considered to be good with mines and shit. They mine minerals and ore and stuff like that. But it does, again, it can go too far. Like just automatically assuming that your dwarf can quote, sniff them out when it comes to finding mines and stuff. It all sounds like your DM is very inexperienced in the game. And then you say that when coming back from a missed session, your character was assumed to have just been drunk. Well, when you miss a session, if you don't leave instructions with how your character's to be run when you're not there, or if you don't expect it, and, oh, I'm going to miss this session, you should be messaging your DM or at least another player or something saying, look, I can't make it, but just as in general, here's what I would like my character to do. If you're not there, I've run more games than I've played in, and when DMing, if a player doesn't show up unexpectedly, and I don't know what it is that they want their person to do when they're not there, then they've got to do something, right? So, in worst case scenario, okay, everyone just decided, we'll just assume that his character was drunk for this session. When you come back, if you have any sort of reasonably decent DM, and you discovered, oh, no, I was planning on my character being sober and trying hard to hold to a nightly code, you have that conversation with your DM. It takes 45 seconds, 60 seconds, and the DM says, okay, fair enough. And it takes a minute or less to retcon something like that. Okay, instead of being drunk, you were off doing this or that. Or what do you think you would have been doing then? Again, it keeps coming back to your DM seems very inexperienced in the game and how to run it. But it should have been as simple as talking to your DM saying, oh, look, my dwarf is actually, he stays sober and works pretty hard to hold to this nightly code. What can we do about this? And the DM should have been able to retcon that in 40 seconds for you. And now, the thing about entering a tavern and the DM pulling up a song from YouTube that was an hour of, quote, dwarf music, you can't blame that on the DM. It was on YouTube. Because they were dancing and apparently drunk. Well, if that's what was on YouTube for good tavern music, then that's what was on YouTube for good tavern music. That, I think, you're nitpicking when it comes to some of these things. It seems like maybe you're nitpicking a little bit. Maybe you had certain expectations for how the game was going to be and how the group was going to act and stuff like that. And it seems like you might be a little bit disappointed that it's not the way you envisioned it. I think that there needs to be some leeway on both sides when it comes to you and the obviously inexperienced DM. Now, I am 100% on your side when it comes to trying to talk to NPCs and all of the NPCs talking down to your character, because your DM is running the game, your DM is running the NPCs. And even if it is a town where generally, let's just assume it's a town that has had bad experiences with dwarves and generally are, let's say, racist when it comes to dwarves. Not every single NPC is going to be like that. Just like you might be in a community in the real world that has a touch of racism run through it, but not everybody's going to be like that. The worst thing that I've read in this, when it comes to how your DM is acting, is when the occurrence happened with you and an NPC, making basically short jokes or whatever, and your character is, like, keep that short, people, stuff to yourself. The DM breaking character to explain why his NPC would say that. That is definitely the sign of either an inexperienced DM or just an asshole who really is trying to give you a hard time. The reason I don't lean toward that very much, though, is because, again, from what I said at the beginning, your DM seems to be very inexperienced, and the rest of the players seem to be going along with it, and you seem to be the odd one out at the table. I'm not justifying it and saying it's right. I'm just pointing out what it looks like. But yes, the DM actually breaking character to make sure he, quote, wins the argument, or lays down the law or whatever, letting you know how it is. Well, your character is short. That it was needless, and again, it points to a very inexperienced DM. Now, I wouldn't say that you're just overreacting, but, I've already said it too many times in this video. You seem to be the odd one out of the group. Now, again, you say that you miss another session. So when you missed another session and came back, it turns out your fellow PCs signed you up for a tournament. Again, that goes back to what I said. If you're going to miss a session, your character has to do something, even if you're not there. So if you're not leaving instructions with your DM, or you're not messaging your DM saying, look, I can't make it, but just in general, this is kind of the general way I want my character to act while I'm gone. If you're not doing that, you have to do something. So it is up to the DM to decide what's going to happen. And at least it's not being drunk the whole session. Because the first session that you mentioned missing, everyone just decided that your character was drunk. Okay, you didn't like that. So the next time you missed a session, they didn't do that. Instead, they signed you up for a tournament. Now, something like that is a little bit much, like signing you up for a combat tournament of some sort while you're not there and without you knowing. That is a little bit crossing the line of what they should be doing with your character when you're not there, but still it's better than just being drunk. It sounds like an inexperienced DM that is trying to improve what they did last time you weren't there. Again, I could be wrong, but I'm just saying what it looks like. Now, I do think that it should have been made known somehow, it doesn't have to be done out of character, but I think the DM should have made it clear to everybody that if you lose in this tournament, the king is known to execute people who lose in these tournaments. That would have been something nice to know. And why you're level 5 fighting against a king's knight with 3 attacks and stuff like that, I have no idea. Other than it's something that you're not necessarily supposed to be able to win. That's just a bad setup. Again, inexperienced DM. Having a setup like that where the king could based on a die roll, could kill you or have you execute it if you lose, and you're going up against a character who you're almost guaranteed to lose against. That's a bit, again, very inexperienced DM. And when it comes to the DM and PCs giving you a hard time, sending you shots about you being a dwarf, stuff like that, again, what are the other players, like what's the party composition here? Is it a bunch of humans, a bunch of elves, humans and elves? Is it a generally mixed party and you're the only dwarf? Maybe they just like making fun of dwarfs, having fun. And it depends too on your guys' age, the age bracket of the players, because it sounds like the DM is very inexperienced. It sounds like a lot of the players may be very inexperienced, and it sounds like they're just kind of having fun giving you a hard time. I'm not necessarily saying you're overreacting. And even if you are, quote, overreacting, that's not the point. You're not enjoying the game, and that's not good. There are many different types of groups, many different types of DMs, and I do know how hard it can be to find a decent DM and a decent group that you fit well with. But if you're not enjoying the game at the end of the day, you really do need to leave that game and find another group. If you can't find a group in person, go on Roll20 and find an online group. There's always going to be a group that your personality type and your play style will be able to fit into nicely. When you say things like, I'm tired of it, it's killing my enthusiasm, that makes me concerned about your passion for the hobby. Because it's such a wonderful hobby that we share. And I really don't like hearing people become, I don't like hearing that kind of thing where people are starting to dislike the game. So if you feel like you should, the session, when you play a session and at the end of that session you didn't have fun and you feel like you shouldn't be playing, I just don't want to, I'm not looking forward to the next session, that's when you know it's time to sit down and evaluate your situation and decide, am I going to actually stay in this game? And the answer is no, you shouldn't. Now, an easy solution, a very easy solution, is to speak to your DM. Basically let them know, look, you run the world, you run the game, but this is my character and I run my character. I get to play my character the way I want, and the way I want to play my character as a sober, honorable dwarf. That's who he is. Now, any reasonable and even remotely experienced DM will take that into consideration and work with you on that to make the game better for everybody. But I don't think that your DM is very experienced, based on the story. And again, it's only one-sided, but based on the one-sided story that I heard, I don't think that your DM is very experienced in the role and in the hobby. And yeah, it just sounds like the DM is doing what he's doing, the rest of the party's going along with it, the rest of the players are having fun going along with it, and you're the odd one out. And I'm not saying that as a negative thing. I'm not trying to be on the GM side or anything like that. I just think the best thing for OP would be to find a new group if nothing else works. But before you do that, always try to speak to your DM and fellow players about any issues you have. You'd be surprised how often things can work out if you just simply have a conversation. Now I'm going to stop there because I know that this has been a long and probably mostly pointless rant when it comes to my thoughts on the story that we just heard. But it doesn't matter. I said what I thought after reading it, and nothing I would change. Talk to your DM, try to work it out. If it doesn't work out, or if they're just being dicks, then leave the game, man. If you're not happy and you're not having fun, leave the game and find a new one. If you can't find one in person, go to Roll20 and find an online game. Like I said, I completely understand how hard it can be to find players or to find groups. See, I have as a longtime DM, I have the opposite. I have the problem of it's hard for me to find decent players to come and play in the group that we want to keep. But I definitely understand from a player's perspective how hard it can be to find a group that you fit in with very well, that you want to stay with. And I understand the struggle of once you get into a group, it doesn't matter if you're enjoying it, you found a group to play the game. And you don't want to risk losing that and waiting months or maybe even years to find another group to play again. But at the end of the day, if you're not having fun, don't let it ruin your passion. I hope the OP either speaks to their DM and fellow players and it works out, or finds a new group to play in. Either way, I hope it works out, because it would be a shame to lose another player to this hobby that we all love. Well, that'll be all for this stream. Thanks for watching. I appreciate it. Whether you watched live or after the fact, and regardless of the platform, I'm glad you stopped by. And if you haven't already, make sure you like, share, subscribe, follow, and all that good stuff. And don't forget to follow on Twitter. It's Mav_freelance, and Instagram, Maverick_freelance. And hopefully I'll see you all next time. And until then, happy gaming.